When an empath finally stops carrying the emotional weight of everyone around them, something profound begins to shift. This shift isn't selfishness, it's sovereignty. It's the moment their sensitivity stops being a burden and becomes their power. And in the first 30 seconds of this transformation, the world feels it even before they do. Because the moment an empath awakens, they stop feeding the systems, relationships, and dynamics that depended on their endless giving. They stop abandoning themselves to keep the peace. They stop betraying themselves to stay liked. And that is exactly the moment Carl Jung would describe as the beginning of individuation, the path to becoming who you truly are. Imagine sitting alone after yet another day of absorbing everyone's stress, smoothing everyone's emotions, and swallowing your own truth. You're exhausted not just physically, but spiritually. For the first time, instead of forcing yourself to keep going, you pause. You ask a dangerous question. What if I stopped? Jung believed this question marks the birth of consciousness, because once you ask it, you can't go back to the person you were before. That question cracks open the truth you've been avoiding your whole life. The truth that your sensitivity isn't just a gift, it's also a survival strategy. A way you learn to stay safe by tuning into everyone else before tuning into yourself. And once you see that, the mask you've worn for years begins to fall. Jung would say this is the death of the persona, the social mask that kept you acceptable, agreeable, and endlessly helpful. In its place, something stronger emerges, not hardness, not cruelty, but clarity. The clarity to see who drains you, the clarity to see who respects you, the clarity to recognize manipulation, guilt tactics, and emotional dependency for what they truly are. Because awakening doesn't make an empath cold. It makes them conscious. It makes them selective. It makes them powerful in a way that threatens every dynamic built on their silence. This is the journey you're about to step into, the transformation from people-pleasing empath to sovereign self. A journey Jung mapped out through individuation, shadow integration, and the birth of psychological independence. And in the chapters ahead, we'll break down this awakening step by step. So take a breath, because once you begin, you won't be the same. There comes a moment in every empath's life when the energy they've spent years giving outward suddenly begins flowing back toward them. This shift is subtle at first, but it marks the beginning of a profound inner revolution. Jung would describe this moment as the initial spark of individuation, the point where unconscious patterns start rising into awareness. For the empath, this feels like waking up inside their own life for the very first time. You've spent years absorbing everyone's emotions, smoothing over conflict, and serving as the emotional filter for every room you enter. Your default setting has always been give comfort, give understanding, give emotional labor. But in this first stage of awakening, something inside you refuses to keep operating on that old programming. You begin noticing how drained you feel after every interaction. You start realizing how much of your energy has been flowing outward without your consent. For the first time, you catch yourself before automatically stepping into a caretaking role. And that moment of pause is revolutionary. In Jungian language, this is the beginning of the ego becoming aware of the unconscious forces that have been driving it. You're no longer simply reacting, you're noticing. You're observing your own patterns instead of acting them out. This shift often feels uncomfortable because it challenges the identity you built around being helpful, kind, and endlessly available. But it also brings an unexpected sense of relief. You start to feel energy returning that you didn't even know you'd lost. You may find yourself less exhausted by social environments. You may stop absorbing people's moods as if they were your own. You may even feel a new sense of strength rising quietly inside you. Others around you will notice this change quickly, sometimes before you do. People who relied on your emotional openness may sense that you're no longer as accessible. They might push back, guilt trip, or try to pull you into old roles. But something inside you has shifted, and you can't fully return to the way things were. This inward flow of energy marks the reclaiming of your life force. Jung would call this the beginning of psychological ownership. The moment you start belonging to yourself instead of the world around you. This is the first sign that you're stepping into conscious awakening. It's the stage where your sensitivity becomes fuel for growth rather than a drain on your spirit. The journey has officially begun. As the empath continues awakening, the next shift is impossible to ignore: the collapse of the persona. Jung used the term persona to describe the mask we wear to navigate society. The version of ourselves crafted to be acceptable, likable, and non-threatening. For empaths, this mask is usually built on being the nice one, the agreeable one, the one who never says no, the one who always stays calm, composed, and helpful no matter how depleted they feel inside. But as consciousness rises, this mask becomes heavier and harder to maintain. You begin noticing moments where you simply can't play that old role anymore. You catch yourself speaking more honestly than usual. You start expressing opinions you used to silence. You admit when you're tired instead of forcing a smile. This is not rebellion, it's emergence. It's the authentic self rising through the cracks of the persona. Jung warned that the death of the persona can feel terrifying because it forces us to confront how much of our identity was built on pleasing others. And for the empath, this confrontation is especially intense. You realize that your niceness wasn't always a choice. It was a survival strategy. It was the way you kept peace, the way you avoided rejection, the way you earned acceptance. But now, that strategy no longer fits. Your soul refuses to participate in your own self-erasure, so you begin telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. You say no with fewer apologies. You stop cushioning your words to protect other people's comfort. And the moment this happens, something fascinating occurs. People react. Some will be surprised. Some will be uncomfortable. Some will accuse you of changing. But what they really mean is that you've stopped performing the version of yourself that benefited them. This is the moment Jung described when he said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, because self-acceptance threatens any relationship that depended on your self-sacrifice. As the mask falls, you begin prioritizing your truth over their approval. You begin choosing authenticity over social harmony. And while this can trigger temporary conflict, it creates long-term liberation. This stage is messy, raw, and beautifully necessary. It marks the beginning of living as your real self, not your safe self. And once the mask begins to crumble, you can never fully put it back on. As the empath continues awakening, the third major shift is what Jung called the return of projections. Projection is the psychological process where we unintentionally assign our own qualities, hopes, and virtues to other people. Empaths are especially prone to this because they naturally see potential, depth, and goodness even in people who haven't earned that perception. You tend to assume others feel as deeply as you do. You believe they care as much as you care. You imagine that their intentions match your own. But during individuation, this illusion begins to dissolve. You stop seeing who people could be and start seeing who they actually are. This is what I call the projection recall. It's the moment you recognize that the qualities you admired in others were often your own traits reflected back at you. Jung believed that everything that irritates or disappoints us in others can teach us something about ourselves. For the awakening empath, this is especially true. You begin noticing how your frustration with selfish people is connected to your own suppressed need for healthy self-interest. You see how your disappointment in others' lack of sensitivity mirrors the sensitivity you've never allowed yourself to claim fully. Projection withdrawal isn't comfortable, clarifying. You start recognizing patterns of manipulation that used to slip past you unnoticed. You notice when someone only contacts you in crisis. You see the difference between genuine vulnerability and emotional dependency. You realize that some people weren't misunderstood, they were misrepresented by your imagination. This shift brings a new kind of vision, a sober vision, a vision that tells the truth without the sugarcoating. You stop making excuses for harmful behavior. You stop rewriting people's intentions to protect your idealized version of them. You stop believing that you can fix someone simply because you understand their pain. And with this clarity comes a crucial insight. Not everyone is meant to have access to your empathy. This is where boundaries begin to take shape naturally. Not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of truth. When projection falls away, connection becomes more authentic, because you're finally relating to who people aren't who you imagined they could be. This is one of the most powerful stages of the empath's awakening, because the moment you stop projecting, you stop being deceived. You step into a relationship with reality instead of fantasy. And that clarity is the foundation of your sovereignty. Once projections fall away, the empath steps into one of the most life-changing phases of awakening, the realization that boundaries are not optional. They are sacred. They are necessary. They are a declaration that your energy, your time, and your emotional world belong to you. Jung believed that psychological maturity begins when a person develops a direct relationship with their inner signals. For empaths, this is revolutionary, because UVA spent most of your life prioritizing external cues over your own instincts. You cared more about how others felt than how you felt. You listened to their needs before your own. You shaped yourself around their expectations. But during individuation, your inner voice gets louder, so loud that you can no longer ignore it. You begin recognizing the subtle warnings your body gives you. You notice when a situation drains you. You sense when a person oversteps. You feel the tightening in your chest before you say yes to something you don't want to do. And for the first time, you honor those signals. You say no without guilt. You stop apologizing for protecting your energy. You refuse to justify your boundaries to people who never respected them in the first place. This is what I call sacred selfishness. It's not the selfishness of taking from others. It's the sacred act of not abandoning yourself. Jung would describe this as individual integrity, the alignment of your inner truth with your outer behavior. As you embrace boundaries, the dynamics around you begin to shift. People who valued you for your kindness will adjust to the new version of you. People who valued you for your compliance will not. Some will push back, insisting you're being cold, distant, or difficult. But deep down you recognize the truth. They were benefiting from your lack of boundaries. And that realization strengthens you rather than shakes you. You stop feeling responsible for managing other people's emotions. You stop taking on blame that isn't yours. You stop sacrificing your peace to maintain relationships that don't honor you. This is the moment your sense of self becomes non-negotiable. You begin to feel an internal solidity you've never known before. Your life becomes quieter, cleaner, and more spacious. Your relationships become fewer but more aligned. And your emotional world starts to feel like it finally belongs to you. This is one of the greatest milestones in the empath's awakening. Because boundaries don't separate you from others, they connect you to yourself. As boundaries strengthen, an unexpected and powerful transformation begins. The guilt starts to fade. For empaths, guilt has been a lifelong companion. Guilt for saying no. Guilt for having needs. Guilt for disappointing others. Guilt for existing in a way that doesn't revolve around service. But when you awaken, this guilt begins to dissolve, not because you stop caring, but because you finally understand that guilt was never your truth. It was conditioning. Jung described this phase as the integration of the shadow, the moment when you stop rejecting the parts of yourself that you were taught to hide. Your needs, your desires, your anger, your boundaries, your instincts. As you reintegrate these parts, guilt loses its power over you. You begin to see that many times, guilt was not a moral signal. It was manipulation disguised as concern. It was pressure disguised as expectation. It was other people's discomfort reflected back onto you. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. You stop apologizing for protecting your own well-being. You stop explaining yourself to people who never took accountability for how they treated you. You stop shrinking to make others feel comfortable. Instead, you breathe more easily. You walk more lightly. You feel more at home in your own body. When someone says, "You've changed," you no longer panic. You no longer rush to prove that you're still the same person. You simply acknowledge the truth. Yes, I have changed. And that's exactly what was supposed to happen. Jung believed that becoming conscious makes you responsible for your own worth, not dependent on external validation. And that's what the empath discovers in this stage. Your value no longer comes from how much you give. Your worth is no longer tied to how much you endure. Your identity is no longer built on how well you keep everyone else comfortable. This is the beginning of living freely instead of living conditionally. As guilt fades, authenticity rises. You choose what feels aligned rather than what feels expected. You follow your inner knowing rather than external pressure. You stop performing kindness and begin embodying truth. This stage is liberating because it reveals who you are beneath the weight of obligation. It shows you that your compassion doesn't disappear when guilt dissolves. It becomes purer, cleaner, real. And from this space you begin stepping into connections, decisions, and life choices that reflect your true self, not your conditioned self. In the final stage of the empath's awakening, something remarkable begins to unfold. Your sensitivity becomes conscious rather than compulsive. You still feel deeply, but you no longer drown in what isn't yours. You still care, but you no longer collapse into caretaking. You still connect, but you no longer abandon yourself in the process. Jung described this stage as conscious relationship, the ability to remain fully yourself while still engaging with others. For the empath, this is a completely new experience. You begin building relationships from clarity, not from fear or obligation. You choose people who respect your boundaries instead of exploiting your openness. You gravitate toward those who meet you as equals rather than depend on you for emotional survival. You learn to love without losing yourself. You learn to help without self-sacrifice. You learn to listen without absorbing every feeling in the room. Your empathy becomes boundaried, intentional, and wise. This is what I call conscious sensitivity. It's sensitivity sharpened by self-awareness rather than dulled by exhaustion. Your intuition becomes clearer because it's no longer clouded by other people's emotions. Your decisions become easier because you're no longer paralyzed by the need for universal approval. Your relationships become deeper because you're finally showing up as your real self, not your performance self. This stage often brings a great sorting of connections. Some relationships grow stronger, now grounded in honesty and mutual respect. Others fade away, exposed as one-sided or conditional. Jung called this the differentiation between genuine love and neurotic attachment. You discovered that many relationships were built on your usefulness, not your essence. And although this realization can be painful, it also brings liberation, because what remains after the shedding is real, authentic, balanced, reciprocal. You no longer force connections. You no longer chase validation. You no longer tolerate dynamics that drain your spirit. Instead, you become a source of clarity for yourself and others. You stand rooted in your own center while allowing others to stand in theirs. You shine as a lighthouse, steady, grounded, and self-resourced. You offer light without burning yourself out. You offer guidance without rescuing. You offer love without losing identity. This is the final stage Jung envisioned, the becoming of a conscious individual, a sovereign empath, a person who can meet the world with an open heart and a strong spine, a person who gives from fullness rather than emptiness, a person who has learned that sensitivity is not a curse, it is a superpower when held with awareness. You've just walked through the full journey from people-pleasing empath to conscious, sovereign self. We explored how the energy shifts inward, how the false mask falls away, how projections return home, how boundaries become sacred, how guilt dissolves, and how conscious connection becomes your new way of relating. If this resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to Psychology Insights. Your support helps this message reach more people who are ready to awaken. Remember this, your breaking point can become your breakthrough, and your sensitivity, when claimed, becomes your greatest strength.